welcome to Macros with Mythili, the 18-hour show that takes a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues and developments in India and overseas. In this edition of Macros with Mythili, we're going to take a hard look at not just one, but two major developments in the week gone by. First, the first quarter GDP numbers, and second, the mega bank merger announced by the FM Nirmala Sitharaman. Joining me in discussion are three experts: M. Govind Rao, well-known economist, member of the 14th Finance Commission and formerly head of the Delhi-based Fiscal think tank NIPFP; Dilip Shenoy, Secretary General FICCI; and N.R. Bhanumurthy, Professor NIPFP. Welcome to the show, Govind, Dilip, Bhanumurthy.
Hi.
Let me start by asking all three of you in turn a question that dogs all of us, especially after the CSO's data shows that growth actually slipped to a 25-quarter low of just 5% in the April to June quarter of the current fiscal. The last time we had such dismal numbers was in Q1 2013 under the UPA government, when the Manmohan Singh government was battling charges of policy paralysis, etc., following the CAG report on the coal scam. So, just how bad is it really? And if we apply the highly debatable and perhaps disputable Arvind Subramanian test and discount this growth by 2.5 percentage points, growth actually falls closer to 2.5%, worse than the erstwhile Hindu rate of growth. Let me start with you, Govind. How bad are things really?
Well, I think it's very bad. It's very disappointing. I think the market expected the growth rate to be somewhere about at least 5.5%. But this 5% comes as a bit of a shock. But the people who have seen the economy or the slowdown in the economy are not very surprised, because in spite of all the denials, the economy has actually been slowing down much more than what was sort of portrayed. And what is worrying is that the manufacturing growth has come down so sharply. I mean, it's just about 0.6% as compared to 12.1% in the last year. And it's not just that. Every major sector, whether it is trade and hotels or whether it is construction, there is a deceleration. But I think the manufacturing sector deceleration is much more worrying.
But Dilip, as a Secretary General FICCI, you are much better placed than the rest of us armchair economists when it comes to understanding what is really happening on the ground. So do you agree with Govind? What is your assessment? How bad are things? Govind says, yes, things are bad, but everybody is hoping for 5.5. But is 5% the reality, Dilip?
So actually if you take what President FICCI mentioned yesterday, he also said that the 5% growth was slightly disappointing, because we thought that there would be slightly higher growth. But the interesting part to note, this is quarter one. That means April, May, June. And this was at the height of the election time, right? So a lot of things, I think at that point of time, there was maybe a bit of uncertainty in the air. The consumption was also down. Investment was also down. So you're seeing this as a result of multiple factors in the past. Hopefully, going forward, possibly this is the bottoming out of the cycle, and we should see growth creeping up back again. But it's very important to understand the time and context in which this data was done. Right.
Okay, Dilip, I hope you're right in that, except that, quarter after quarter, we keep saying, okay, this is the worst, things can't get worse, and they still get worse. Bhanumurthy, as a member of the Mandal committee that went into the construction of the GDP back series, you have an excellent sense of the intricacies and the complexities really of making GDP estimates. Are the latest estimates a better reflection of the high frequency data, suggesting that CSO has taken care to address the past criticisms? Or does it substantiate the somewhat sneaky feeling that much of the past criticism was really politically motivated, so that while estimates are widely criticized when they're robust, the criticism is almost completely absent when the numbers are dismal? Bhanumurthy?
Yeah, I think we need to really get out of this whole discussion on the GDP estimation. Because as you rightly said, I was part of not only the Mandal committee, but also a member of the advisory committee on national accounts. I have gone through the whole exercise, the way the Ministry of Statistics undertaken the whole revision. So it was a very, very meticulous process. but unfortunately it got into the political muddle, largely because of the number that has generated, and I have already taken a position that it is absolutely wrong to compare the new numbers with the old numbers, and that is one of the reasons there was huge criticism about generating the back series. Coming to the quarterly GDP numbers, as we all know, I think it is largely based on the forecasts of many of the indicators. So, assuming that they are accurate, now that is how this 5% GDP number is coming for the first quarter. But I would like to believe that the GDP numbers would be slightly lower than 5%, especially when you look at some of the sectors like agriculture seems to be expected to grow at 2%, but on the ground, if you look at, there are many districts have been declared drought prone. So, given other numbers, if you look at some other numbers also, I think they are all based on the projections, and I would think that the GDP numbers would be slightly less than 5% for the quarter when the final numbers come up.
Okay, so that's not good news at all, because Bhanumurthy believes that the worst is yet to come. Govinda, but if we look at the disaggregated numbers, and you spoke about the disaggregated numbers a little earlier, so should we take heart from the electricity growth that has consistently performed very well over the past 5 quarters, or should we despair, as you said, over manufacturing that has fallen to an unprecedented low of 0.6%, Govind?
Well, I mean, two points. One is, I mean, we do not know. I mean, even though Bhanumurthy believes that it could be even lower, we still do not know how things would be. And Dilip, on the other hand, thinks that it would be better. And as far as the drought, agricultural growth is concerned, I don't really see much of a problem, because the issue of drought comes for the next quarter, and that's where we will have a much more serious issue. Because the first quarter of the last year or the current year is not the one where you had the it is April to June, and the rainfall started thereafter. And on the electricity this thing, I think that's one of the greener things in the entire scheme of things. But my worry is manufacturing. If electricity grows growth is so much, why is it that the manufacturing is not growing at all? I mean, that's one of the major worries I have, and and I think we need to really we take it as a challenge, and immediate policy action is imperative. Crisis is the mother of reforms. We should consider this as almost a crisis, and then we should really start expediting our reforms.
Dilip, you have your finger on the pulse of the economy. So what explains to your mind the poor performance of manufacturing? Despite efforts like Make in India, the genuine improvement that we've seen in ease of doing business, etc. Is it really export slowdown alone? But can it explain manufacturing falling to 0.6%, Dilip?
No, if you look at manufacturing and you look at the first quarter, I mean, the auto is nearly a very large chunk of manufacturing if you look at it. If that sector is decelerated by 15 to 20% or 30% as the numbers are actually showing. So obviously manufacturing will decline, because auto has a great impact on steel, on rubber, the whole ecosystem actually comes down. The second is that the summer was slightly delayed. So the impact of the growth in refrigerator and air conditioner sales was perhaps at the tail end of the June cycle. Maybe July you would actually see that coming out in a larger way. So if you look at the consumer durable sector, it actually had a challenge. Then because of the stress in, let's say, the construction area and the unsold inventory, so things like cement and others also did not grow as much as actually expected. So multiple sectors are facing different kind of problems, and cumulatively the growth rate in manufacturing has actually declined. So you will see that some of the sectors based on some of the steps taken in the last few months actually tend to come out of the downturn going forward. But you must understand that this is again first quarter data. The steps were taken post election results towards end June, July and August. So there's going to be a lag effect when the impact of these steps are actually impacting the market. And I don't think that this is the end of the reform process. You're going to see much more things coming up in the next few weeks and months. In fact, Minister Goel was with us yesterday, and so was the Labour Minister, and they said that we are at work, and give us your suggestions, and we will implement them on the ground going forward. But it's going to take time and effort to actually take these steps forward. The problem, as I said earlier, is that consumption is actually slowing. So if there's some way we can kickstart consumption, right? And if you look at the data there, government services actually showed a great growth, 8-point-some% if you look at the data, and that was I think primarily because of the expenditure on the elections and things like that. But to really kickstart manufacturing, we have to get consumption back, and it's very important. Consumption does not improve if sentiment is down. So if the government continues on the reform process and the sentiment goes up, then consumption will improve, and it will be a virtuous cycle going forward.
Okay, so the vicious cycle could turn virtuous. But Bhanumurthy, Govind spoke about the disconnect between electricity consumption and manufacturing growth. What is your sense? How do the two gel? And as Dilip pointed out, public expenditure has held up fairly well. Can we expect that to continue, or will government's obsession with fiscal deficit prevent that from happening? Bhanumurthy?
I think it was very clear that the government seems to have taken an easy path in the fiscal policy of spending more for consumption and reducing on the public capital expenditure. And I think that would have reflected in the number that has been shown up on the government consumption side, where the public administration has increased to 8.5%. That is the highest growth rate in that overall in the first quarter. But going forward, I think in my view is that I think they need to really relook at the overall FRBM roadmap. In my view, the problems on the fiscal actually started with the finance bill of 2018, where they dumped that whole concept of revenue deficit. So given that kind of situation, I don't think you expect any expansionary kind of impact of the fiscal policy. On the manufacturing, it's true that it has grown at 0.6%, but is actually been corroborated by some of the numbers that RBI has released yesterday in the weekly statistical supplement. So if you look at the bank credit to commercial sector until the current financial year, from April to right now, it has grown at minus 0.8%, and that too on the back of 110 basis point reduction in the interest rates. So I think there are different deep rooted structural issues in the manufacturing sector, and I'm sure Mythili, you remember, I've been opposing this interest rate cuts, and if at all, if you want to really revive the growth, it was the fiscal that should have come up front and the monetary should have followed. And as I said, it is more of a sequencing problem. I hope the finance ministry at least realize now, and in that context I was saying that it is very important for us to relook at the FRBM Act and get back to its original philosophy of expenditure switching mechanism, rather than what the government following right now, which is more of an expenditure compression mechanism, which will be not growth supporting.
In fact, I'd agree with you entirely, Bhanumurthy, but I'm not sure Govind will, but we'll come to that after the break. Please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and I'm in discussion with three experts on two major developments in the week gone by: the first quarter GDP numbers and the mega bank merger. Govind, sticking with the GDP estimates, the gross fixed capital formations, the GFCF, continues to fall. Is that a case for more government capital spending, as Bhanumurthy pointed out?
And in fact, I would like to make 2-3 points. One is that what Dilip mentioned, I underline that point, that you see there has been a deceleration in consumption. Private final consumption has been decelerating. The second thing is government capital expenditure. So in fact, capital formation generally has been decelerating. The second thing that I want to do is, I think it's time that we wake up and get our GST sort of structure right. The 28% this thing that you have on all air conditioners, refrigerators, cement, it has been impacting adversely the major consumer durables, as well as vehicles, as well as the construction, cement, steel. You charge 28%. I think it is time for the GST Council to take a call and get rid of this 28%, because the point is that this has been having a very ostensibly an sort of luxury item, but actually it is an item where a lot of employment is is going to be lost. So I think that's one of the major things that they need to do to improve this thing. And as far as the fiscal issue is concerned, it is true that the revenue deficit is important and they should get it back in the FRBM scheme of things. But much more important is that there has to be a very quick action plan on disinvestment, and in fact the money that from the disinvestment is the one that should be used. I think for boosting public expenditure. I think further raid into the household sector saving through this thing is not going to help us in keeping the interest rates low, real interest rates low for the people at large, for the businesses. So it is very important that we need to act on the GST front first, because if you see the list of items on 28%, it is enormous.
Okay.
I don't understand this at all.
Okay. Dilip, Govind suggests that we rework that 28% bracket, but for reasons somehow best known to itself, government is not doing it. And it's also shying away from calling that a stimulus package, even though the announcements on 23rd August was like a mini package. Would you agree? So why is the government shying away from saying that this is a stimulus package? Dilip?
No, so if you look at the earlier stimulus packages which came out in 2008 or 2002, it was very simple for the government to announce a cut in excise duty and give a whole lot of other stimulus, to the sectors. But with GST, the process is different. The GST Council has to agree. So all the state finance ministers, and you have a different process there. So first, the process is entirely different, right? And sometimes, I think now we have to actually get all the state finance ministers and all the state chief ministers to kind of agree. And typically the GST Council is going by consensus, and they're not taking the voting route out or something like that. So creating a consensus is there. So therefore that's the first thing. The second issue is that if the economy is not growing and you have committed expenditure on the social side, and you have different other committed expenditures which you have to do, then the challenge is that if you forego revenue, then how do you balance the budget and meet the fiscal deficit? And a lot of people from industry are saying that, okay, in times like in this, do you pause and do you relook at that process going forward? But I think the whole country needs to get together. All political parties need to get together if there is going to be any GST reduction stimulus. And like Govind mentioned, that this 28% needs to be relooked at, and maybe go down closer to 1 or 2 rates, or maybe just say, okay, because October is a great festive season, right? So if you want to front load demand, you say we till Diwali or till end of October, we are reducing we are giving you this incentive or that incentive, and it goes on. But again, the process needs to be in place, and the GST Council has to kick in. I don't think the central government can do it on its own.
Yeah, it's no longer easy for the central government. But Bhanumurthy, the RBI annual report was just released just a day before we got the GDP numbers. Called the present, slowdown, he called it a soft patch, perhaps morphing into a cyclical downturn, but it's unlikely to be a deeper structural one. Would you agree with that assessment, or given the numbers that we're now seeing, is it more a deeper structural issue? Bhanumurthy?
Well, I think again RBI annual report doesn't want to make it kind of a sensational kind of a statement, it looks like. And if you look at the numbers from 2018-19 first quarter to right now, and if you disaggregate this whole series as a structural as well as transitory component, and you will clearly see that both the components in the macro time series is actually showing a slowdown, and that's what and on that basis only I made a point sometime back that the slowdown right now is a combination of both cyclical as well as structural factors, and this was also supported by Dr. Rangarajan in one of the articles recently. So I think the problem here is somehow the policy makers doesn't seem to have some kind of forward looking kind of assessment. Now I think the whole point is right now they took a long time to understand there is a slowdown. Now even yesterday the finance ministry officials feel that we are basically exaggerating the slowdown, and I think that's what I feel, that in the whole policy environment seems to lack the empirically based forward looking assessment. So in that sense I think we need to have measures that can contain both cyclical as well as structural factors. That means you should go for some kind of short term measures as well as medium term to long term measures if at all you want to get close to 8% at least maybe in a couple of years down the line.
Absolutely. So Govindama, we move to the next announcement, that of bank reform. While the government has announced a recapitalization package, not for the entire 70,000 crores, but at least 55,000 crores, do you think the fact that you're trying to force this merger down the necks of public sector banks is going to take away the benefit of that recapitalization, Govind?
Well, I mean, that is it's too early to say, because first of all, this announcement, how exactly these banks will react to these, particularly the employees of the banks will react to these, will have to be seen. And secondly, I mean, recapitalization is one of those temporary, sort of things that you try to do. Structurally, you need to deal with the whole governance issue. And again, if you simply say that the risk, the fellows who undertake the risk assessment will be given a market, sort of wages, a salary. But then, how are they going to fit into the whole scheme of things, and where the managing director would be getting much less than the risk assessment? I mean, that, there will be a lot more of issues to be seen. The one final thing that I want to say, not just it, about what Dilip said, the point is that at this stage when the demand is decelerating, where for particular I mean, if you see hotels, trade is declining in growth, manufacturing declining in growth, all these, if you see, and then sort of overall consumption is declining. I know that this has to go through the GST Council, but I think the union government should impress upon and then start discussion on this, so that even the market will see that there is a move towards getting rid of this 28%, and then you can have that is what is indicated earlier, and that is the way we should move.
So Dilip, I'll give you the last word since we're running out of time. What else would you urge the government to do next Friday, perhaps, when you're going to see one more announcement? Which are the other sectors that are in need of succor, and of what kind, Dilip?
The auto sector still is not out of the woods, so you need to refocus on the auto sector, because that's really going to pull up. The second, of course, is construction and the whole real estate sector. So you need to see that. Third is that there's in the whole infrastructure sector, in the roads, that had actually slowed because of the election process. And the ILFS thing also created a whole lot of different challenges there. We need to really get that going, because the Prime Minister, on his Independence Day speech, talked about the 1 lakh crores being invested in infrastructure and the 3 lakh plus crores on water. So if we can front load that, if we can do something there and kickstart these sectors, then at least growth will start coming back. And again, once jobs actually start coming back, the wages look at that, and maybe the new labor code and the wage code, if they come in and they are more friendly to industry. But again, that has to wait for the parliament session. But then again, maybe an ordinance preceding that, so that it gets the sentiment going back. And I think we have to continue to work on doing steps. Whatever can be done, just do it, announce it, get everybody believing that yes, we believe that this whole economy has to be brought back. And that will actually be a huge series of steps to bring back confidence, bring back consumption going ahead.
Bhanumurthy, I think I have time to just squeeze in one more quick question. We talked about structural slowdown. So if you need structural reforms, what are the least disruptive structural reforms? Like GST was an essential structural reform, but it proved very disruptive, and we can't afford disruption now. So what, to your mind, are the least disruptive structural reforms? Very quickly, Bhanumurthy.
I think the financial access is something that I certainly look forward for. Now, the yesterday's announcements actually might reduce the financial access issues. Now, when people compare India with other countries, I think India is the least in terms of the financialization. Now, we need to have more banks, more financial instruments, mergers maybe for some other structural reasons. But I think what we need is more banks, not less. So that would be one major structural thing. And actually it is the savings that is going to help us to revive the overall economy in the medium term to long term. I think that needs to be enhanced by increasing more financial instruments and financial access.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bhanumurthy, Govind, as well as Dilip, for joining me in the discussion. Thank you also for watching. Remember, we'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili.